everybody. Welcome to the 2021 Newhallywood Silent Film Festival. I'm EJ Stevens. And now we get the great honor to talk with a gentleman who I've known for quite a while, who's been a great friend and a great author. And I would have to say a creator of a whole cottage industry, if you will, in that he has made quite a name for himself in going and finding the sites of where some of these great silent films that we've been talking about were filmed, and does a great then and now type of thing. John Bengtson, thank you so very much for joining us.
I'm delighted to be here. Great to see you, EJ.
Yeah. So for those of you who aren't familiar with John's books or lectures, the first one I think you did was on Buster Keaton. Was that correct?
That's correct.
And then Chaplin, and then Harold Lloyd.
That's right.
And the Chaplin book was how I found the Modern Times site here. I lived by it for years and never knew it. So first off, how do you, what got you involved in this very, very cool project?
Well, for some reason, I've always been fascinated by vintage photographs. You know, it's a frozen moment in time and you can study it. And so when you look at a 100-year-old photograph, you know, the people you didn't think, you know, 100 years later, some guy's going to be looking at this photo. And it sort of carried over to silent film. When Buster Keaton's movies came out on home video 25 years ago now, there was a chase scene that was very clearly filmed in North Beach in San Francisco, near where I used to live. And so just sort of, you know, what the heck? I took photographs of my television set. You know, nothing was on the computer yet.
Yeah.
So I took 35 millimeter snapshots of my television set, sent the film to the drugstore, got the snapshots back from the drugstore, and then went over to San Francisco, and I just walked around looking for them. And it was kind of like being a big game hunter. I had an idea they were out there, and I just on foot walked around, and there they were. And it was exciting. It was fun. I to know I was in the same spot as where Buster filmed. And one thing in particular, he filmed a scene on Lombard Street where the twists and turns were later built. It took me a long time to figure it all out, but at the time Buster filmed there, they had just started to construct the twists and turns, and some cranky neighbor who hadn't given permission halted the proceedings. So they had to wait. He was in Europe and hadn't given his permission. So they had to wait for like 3 months to continue the construction work. And finally he came back. And anyway, that's just some odd little bit of San Francisco history, but it's there in the background of Buster's movie. And I think that kind of in a nutshell is what's so interesting about it for me, is that silent movies are also documentaries. They capture a real time and place, and it's a way of exploring the past that just hadn't been utilized much before. This really wasn't possible. I know people have 16 millimeter film collections. So if they had copies of Buster's films, they could have looked through them, but then they would have had to take the print to a lab to get a frame enlargement made. And they would have to grab frame enlargements from different 16 millimeter prints and put them side by side to look at them. I mean, that's just not feasible. But once they were available on home video, especially Laserdisc and DVD, and you could pull frames up from the computer, it became very easy to pull different frames from different movies and put them side by side. And that's how the patterns started to emerge, and that was sort of how I got started and all.
I can really understand when you say it's like big game hunting. I mean, there's so much power in actually being on the exact spot where something happened, you know, and what makes it even more incredible is this was knowledge that was lost. I mean, so at one time, you're the only guy in the world knows that you are at the spot where this happened. I mean, that must have been really thrilling.
It is. I've sensed that many times. And one way I like to describe it is that I sort of invited myself into this exclusive little club when they made the movie, Buster and his crew, they knew where the scene was filmed, and they knew why they pointed the camera north, not south. And maybe in other film people, there are a lot of locations that were commonly used, so other people at the time probably knew about the locations too. But that memory faded from view, and it was lost. But when you find a location and you stand there in person, it's sort of like, wow, I've invited myself into this exclusive little club. They all knew this, and now I'm part of the club. I know it too.
And then you invited all of us into it then, yeah. which is really amazing. Yeah. Yes, I mean, I've loved your books, and I take them with me everywhere we go. Kimmy and I actually did a vacation to Cottage Grove, Oregon, so we could just go and stand in the spots of the General. I know there's probably been hundreds, but do you have like a location that you found that's really, really sticks out, something that's really excited you?
One of my favorite early discoveries is in Seven Chances, where Buster Keaton, it's the church where he puts in the want ad and the hundreds of brides show up at the church. And it's kind of a long story, but I was intrigued by it. And the U.S. Geological Topo maps, I found a vintage topo map of Hollywood in 1920. And one thing that they did is they put a little cross. They had little pepper specks on the map. There'd be these little black squares. And if it was a church, they'd put a cross on it. And you could tell watching the scene that the church was on, presumably looking north, it was on the southeast corner of a T intersection. So I looked through this gigantic topo map, and there were like 6 churches that were on that type of corner. There's also another map, the Sanborn fire insurance maps. In order to accurately gauge insurance rates to charge people, they literally plotted the footprint of every building all across the country, and they would note whether it was made out of brick or wood or whatever. And they would note whether it was near a dynamite factory or near some lake filled with swans or whatever. And that's how they could determine how much to charge for insurance. Well, that was another resource. And at the time, the only way you could access these maps was at the UC Berkeley Map Library. And I live in the East Bay. So one day I drove over to the library. I had to pull the maps out of on microfilm, and I looked up each of those 6 maps, each of those 6 churches. And on one of the maps, the footprint of the church matched how it would look. It had a protruding bay window here and steps here. So sitting in the map room of the UC Berkeley map library, I confirmed absolutely where the church in Seven Chances was. But this was before the internet, before Google Street View or whatever. And I literally had to wait 6 months until my next trip to Los Angeles to drive to the spot, and it was still standing. And so that was that was quite a thrill. It was a thrill because I was nervous the whole time whether the church was still there or not, but also because it was pure detective work, looking through microfilm. And anyway, that was a fun discovery. And the church is beautiful. It's still there.
Yeah, I've been to that church. I know which one you're talking about. I think it's on West Adams downtown.
Yes.
And if I recall, Fatty Arbuckle, Buster's good friend, lived really close to that church at the time he was filming it. Yeah.
Yeah, so he did. That was on. Yeah. It was off West Adams. So yes.
Yeah, beautiful place. You mentioned Seven Chances. Of course, part of that was filmed here locally in Santa Clarita with Beale's Cut.
Yeah.
And it was amazing when you start reading about Buster's films specifically. He would go all over the place to film something.
Absolutely. I mean, one thing that I discovered empirically is that Buster was both very particular and very pragmatic as a filmmaker. So he would travel hundreds of miles to get just the right setting for a joke. But the other thing I discovered is that I found I think 4 dozen or so random insert shots of someone walking on a sidewalk or crossing a street corner. they're all filmed adjacent to a studio.
Mm-hmm.
So for some scenes, I'll just cross the street and put Fred on the corner, and that's good enough. But for other scenes, he would travel all the way to Santa Clarita, or even there's in The Navigator, there's one scene filmed in San Francisco. He went up there and got the shot, and I don't know whether he used that as an excuse to get a free vacation to San Francisco. It's interesting. You gain an appreciation of the working methods of the great comedians once you understand where the locations are. And I mean, the same thing with Harold Lloyd. The big chase at the end of Girl Shy was staged all around Southern California. And so they had to plot everything out. They had to scout the locations. You know, there's the old trope that none of the silent movies had any scripts. And I don't know whether that's true or not, but like I said, for that chase in Girl Shy, it was very carefully planned, and you can't set matching shots filmed 20 miles apart in all these different places and have them line up and fit together without knowing what you're doing and being very deliberate and careful about it. So like I said, Harold went to great trouble to film his chase scenes.
Yeah, you've really opened up a lot of these locations to people all over the world, and like I said, you told me about the Modern Times site, which I'd driven on that road 100 times, and we're trying to mark that. By the way, we've been trying for the last 10 years we have a monument, but we haven't gotten it in the ground yet. But I know
I was there.
That's
when
right.
We unveiled the marker, and it's
That's
a
right.
beautiful monument. And
Beautiful.
yes,
But we're going to get it out there because I think that would be a real gem and a real destination for a lot of silent film and film and Charlie Chaplin film fans around the world. So we're going to get that done. But I know that you've been very responsible for a lot of other things being marked. I think I saw you down at where Buster had his old studio and the new plaque there.
there was a group of dedicated people, and Alec Lev was the key person in charge of it. And then many people in the Damn Finos, the International Buster Keaton Society, worked with him doing work and contributing funds. But together they created this very beautiful plaque honoring the Buster Keaton studio. And also a lot of people don't realize that Charlie Chaplin spent 2 years filming at that studio as well when he was working on his Mutual comedies. He made 16 short films, and he filmed all those at that same studio. So that site has a great deal of history behind it. So anyway, they got together, they designed this beautiful plaque. It honors Chaplin as well. And, it obviously took a great deal of effort to get the permits and whatever. But unfortunately, I forget the name. It's Quixote, the film rental company. They rent lamps and cameras and whatever. The manager of Quixote is a Keaton fan. So when he found out that his building was on the corner where the Keaton and Chaplin studio used to be, he was on board too. But anyway, after a great deal of hard work and effort, the Damn Finos hosted this wonderful ceremony in 2018 to unveil this plaque in the proper location. And the reason why they had to unveil the plaque in the proper location is that about 20 years earlier, a location intended to honor Buster had been put on the wrong corner. And I actually know, I won't say a word, but I actually know the person who confessed to me that he was responsible for putting it on the wrong corner. But at the time, the resources weren't available. He worked with Ralph Edwards when Buster Keaton appeared on This Is Your Life. Apparently, one of the conditions that Eleanor insisted on was that they install a plaque honoring Buster's studio.
Okay.
And my friend was aware of this obligation and that it had gone unfulfilled for 15, 20 years, and he stepped up and got it installed. But like I said, at the time, there weren't internet resources. These maps weren't widely known anyway. So you have to give him credit for honoring Buster, and now there are two plaques.
Yeah, you got the one on the one side of the street. You got it right across the
Yep.
street. I remember when Alec was revealing that plaque, he said, "And just in case we got it wrong ourselves, we've got two more corners." So
Yep.
that somebody will come and put plaques on in the future. So that's really great.
No, I can say this is the right corner. We don't need to install two more.
Don't need to worry about that, right?
Yeah.
Another place that I know that you've been working really hard, and I'd like to find out where you are in the process of that, is the Chaplin, Keaton, Lloyd alley in Hollywood.
It's been a long, slow process, but for people who don't know, there is an alley in Hollywood just south of Cahuenga, just south of Hollywood Boulevard, that runs between Cahuenga and Cosmo, and with the more that I learned, the more that it makes sense. But in the early years, like in 1915, Hollywood was quite undeveloped. The block of Cahuenga that runs from Hollywood Boulevard stopped at Sunset. It ran 2 blocks and it stopped because it didn't have any place to go. And the 1600 block of Cahuenga that goes from Hollywood to Selma, only the north end of that block had any buildings on it. The south end were all vacant lots. But up there at the north end of Cahuenga, there was this alley. And this alley was just a block or two away from the famous Players Lasky studio. Universal was just a mile to the north. And so it turns out this alley was used frequently in early films, early Universal films, because literally, if you needed an alley in 1915, there really weren't a whole lot of other choices. And so it had become sort of a go-to place. And anyway, a few years later, Charlie Chaplin filmed The Kid at the same alley. And then Buster Keaton filmed a famous scene from Cops where he's running down an alley and he grabs a passing car one-handed and he flies out of frame. He filmed that at the alley. And then Harold Lloyd had filmed at the alley a couple times earlier, but he used the back end of the alley to portray the department store where he works in Safety Last.
Wow.
So this alley is absolutely unique. I can guarantee I've found essentially all the Chaplin, Keaton, and Lloyd locations. There isn't some overlapping undiscovered spot where they all filmed. So I can say authoritatively that this alley is absolutely unique in Hollywood history. It's the only spot where Chaplin, Keaton, and Lloyd each filmed a masterpiece. And not only is each film a masterpiece, each film is inducted into the National Film Registry of the Library of Congress. And there is no other spot in Hollywood, and I would say there's probably no other spot in the world that can make that boast of that claim, that Chaplin, Keaton, and Lloyd each made a masterpiece at the same spot. And so what we're hoping to do is there is an alley that runs north-south, and it's called Ika Alley. And there's an Ika Alley Property Owners Association, and they've been very helpful. But I'm talking about the east-west cross arm to the alley.
Yeah.
And if you check the assessor maps and the old historic maps, it's always been a public walkway. No one owns it. It belongs to the city, and it's anonymous. It's never had a name. And so my example is San Francisco. To honor their famous local authors, there are dozens of little random alleys or byways in San Francisco named after famous authors.
Right.
So this just seems like such a great idea. If it would cost little money for the city simply to give this public walkway a name, and in doing so, they would honor not only the 3 great kings of comedy, but they'd be honoring Hollywood's history itself. One reason why Hollywood is Hollywood is because Chaplin and Keaton and Lloyd had their studios in Hollywood. They made their movies in Hollywood, and as they became famous, Hollywood became famous. So it was a symbiotic, mutually building, self-supporting relationship. And so naming this alley just seems like a win-win-win. It will create an international tourist attraction. it'll honor these three great comedians, but it's just it's a great feather in the cap for Hollywood itself, because like I said, I don't think there's any other place in the world that can boast of this claim.
You're trying to get the name changed
Not
for the alley,
changed.
or give it a name.
Yeah, it has no name. It deserves a name.
Oh, sure. Would there be a plaque as well, or just to explain it?
A plaque would be wonderful. There's a building at the back that could actually support a mural.
Oh, wow.
So, I mean,
oh, wow.
I'm not an event planner. I'm not, and I don't live in Los Angeles either. I live in the Bay Area.
Mm-hmm.
So my idea is first steps first, and the easiest thing to do, like I said, it shouldn't cost any money or effort to just, hey, this alley, it doesn't have a name, let's give it a name. And if we can get that taken care of, then, obviously having a plaque, you'd have to raise money to design a plaque and install it, and you'd have to figure out where to install it and maybe get the permission of a property owner or something. But you can imagine if you had an unveiling ceremony where you unveil the plaque, and you maybe could get Leonard Maltin there or something, and it could be a real event.
Do you have a website or something where people could go to, contribute? Or
like I said, giving the alley a name shouldn't even cost any money. So we're not seeking money.
Or maybe moral support, is it a place they can go?
We seek moral support. I have a blog, silentlocations.com, and if you go to silentlocations.com, I have a separate page just on the alley. And I also have a YouTube video where I put clips together and then and now photographs that kind of explain it all. And my main objective is just to get eyeballs.
Sure.
The more people know about this, I mean, just imagine if Quentin Tarantino found out about the alley. He's a big Hollywood supporter and big booster. But if somebody like Quentin Tarantino said, hey, look at this alley, that's great. I'm guessing, but it's easy to imagine that if he made a couple of phone calls,
sure,
it would be done.
Sure.
So we don't need money. We just need eyeballs. So check it out, share it with friends, ask them to share it with friends, because I just have the sense that someday the right person is going to see this and go, oh my gosh, I didn't know. And that'll take care of itself.
Yeah, last year for our first Newhallywood Silent Film Festival, I conducted a bus tour. We actually called it Bus Tour Keaton. Look how clever we are, right? But we actually went to the alleyway and some other sites there, and people were just jazzed, to know that they were at the exact same spot. Well, we hope we can help you with that. I mean, that would be something. It always amazes me how it's so hard to get Hollywood's history recognized in Hollywood, but it just seems like it is. And so I'm sure working together and with a lot of people watching this, maybe we can all somehow pull this off, because that just sounds like a no-brainer and a slam dunk, right? Are you working on a new book or anything this time?
Well, I mentioned my blog. I've been blogging now for close to 10 years. And in terms of content, I think my blog has more information, more new information than my prior 3 books combined. So it's I've sort of done 7 books. 3 are hard paper copies, and 4 are on my blog. I'd love to do a book someday about the Hal Roach studio with, our gang and Laurel and Hardy. There's some reasons why that's not the easiest thing to do now, but knock wood. It'll get easier in a few years, and I'd love to do a project like that. It looks like my Buster Keaton book is out of print, and it would be fun to redo that again someday. It would probably be at least twice as long.
Have you found any new locations recently that we should know about?
I've been asked to do a presentation for Hip Fest, which is a silent film festival in Scotland.
Wow.
And this year it's going to be online. And I hadn't really studied Scottish comedian Billy Ritchie much. if any people know him at all, it's because he kind of dressed like Charlie Chaplin, and I kind of think that's a bum rap. He was actually a working comedian for 10 years before Chaplin, and they both worked at the Fred Carnot Company. And watching the few films of his that are available, he has a very, very distinct, unique on-screen charisma and personality. It's not like Chaplin at all. So I just think, there's only a finite number of mustaches or hats you can wear.
Right, right.
But anyway, I've been looking closely at his films, and this is all pretty obscure, but in one 1915 movie, he's running around on telephone wires, and in the background, you can see up on the hill, Castle Sanssouci, which was at Argyll and Franklin, and also the original Bartlett estate. A.G. Bartlett was one of the first major property owners in Hollywood. He built this large mission-style home, and both of these fabulous homes have long been demolished. But anyway, in the background of this Billy Ritchie film where he's running around on the telephone wires, there in the background, you can see these two buildings. And like I said, it's kind of crazy, but I enjoy making discoveries like that because it makes sense. It should work. If they filmed somewhere 100 years ago at a Hollywood location, it would make sense that whatever was there at the time would be there in the background. And there it is.
I know that feeling because I was lucky enough to help you with get a couple pictures for Harold Lloyd's book. And I just remember climbing in Griffith Park and loving every minute of it to find the exact spot where the camera was and all that. So now you've also found a lot of locations up here in Santa Clarita that you've shared with us. And luckily we've been able to highlight some of those. Can you tell us about some of those?
I don't claim credit. The closing scene from Modern Times where the little tramp walks off, and it was actually, he's walking off into the sunrise. He's not walking off into the sunset.
Right.
But this time he's got the gamine, Paulette Goddard, at his side. And I'm bad with street names and whatever, but Jerry Smith and some other people found that location quite a long time ago. They literally drove around. They had a hunch, and they drove around and they found the spot. But that's a wonderful setting, and it's still there to be seen. But another film, Charlie Chaplin made a film called The Pilgrim, and he used the train station. And again, I'm terrible with names. Was it the Saugus?
Saugus train station, right?
So
which is
at the time Chaplin filmed there, it was the Saugus train station. And thankfully, that's one of the few vintage train stations that was not demolished. The good-sided people in your community arranged to have it moved to, is it the William S.
Hart Park? Yeah.
So,
and we had the great pleasure of screening The Pilgrim there, I think, at our film fest that you were at several years ago.
Yeah, on my blog, I gave a talk about The Pilgrim, and I think the video of my talk is on my blog. I also later discovered that Douglas Fairbanks filmed a movie called Wild and Woolly, and he filmed at the same train station.
Right.
And he had wider point of view shots. So in the background of some shots, there's some buildings in the background, and I believe a couple of them are still there.
I think the Saugus Cafe being one of them.
Like I said, any place you look, you're bound to find something.
It's amazing. I completely love your work. I lose myself for hours on your blog sometimes, and like I said, we take your books with us when we go around Cottage Grove and places like that. It's been great catching up with you, and maybe next year we can have you down to actually, give us a lecture in person, which
that'd be wonderful.
Which is great. And but anyway, it's great talking to you. Thank you so much for joining us, and hope to see you soon.
It's great seeing you, EJ, and thanks so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.